When the HOA imposters stormed into my yard, swaggering about community rules and waving a fine for my dog, they thought I was just an ordinary resident. But they didn't know one thing. I'm the judge of this Oak Ridge district, and now these fools are about to get a lesson they'll never forget. I'm Henry Caldwell, living in Pinewood Estates, a place I thought would be peaceful until the Homeowners Association, or HOA, decided to target me. I've always known the HOA around here was a bunch of busybodies with too much time and too little useful to do. They're the type who love playing judge, jury, and executioner to anyone who doesn't follow their ridiculous made-up rules. They've hassled me before. My fence was 2 inches too tall, my garage door was painted an unapproved color, and they even complained because I parked my car slightly off their imaginary lines. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the day they knocked on my door about Duke, my hound dog. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest video. That morning I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just how I like it, enjoying a rare moment of quiet before heading to the district courthouse to deal with some messy cases. Duke was sprawled on the floor, his head resting on my foot, snoring like an old man after a big lunch. I love moments like this, just me, my coffee, and Duke. No arguing defendants, no long-winded lawyers. But then, through the window pane, I saw 4 figures standing in my yard. I frowned, set my mug down, and stood up. Duke lifted his head, sniffing the air like he knew something was about to go down. There they were, right in front of my gate, like a self-appointed posse. Leading the pack was Linda Grayson, self-proclaimed HOA president, a short-haired, bleach-blonde woman, with oversized sunglasses, arms crossed, and a face like she'd just smelled garbage. Next to her was Norman Tate, clutching a notebook like a third-rate court clerk, Sally Pierce, holding her phone like she was about to film a blockbuster, grinning like a maniac, and Bruce Malone, a hulking musclehead, who looked like he only knew how to nod and follow orders. They were all wearing matching lime green polo shirts with a crooked HOA logo stitched on. Cheap stuff you could tell was ordered online. I took a deep breath, downed the last sip of coffee, and walked out to open the door. Duke ambled behind me, tail wagging slightly like he was saying, "Let's see what they want." Before I could even get the door fully open, Linda spoke up, her tone like she was addressing the press. "Henry Caldwell, we're here because your dog has seriously violated Pinewood Estates community rules, and we're forced to take action." I stood there, staring at her, then glanced at Duke. He let out a big yawn, completely ignoring the crime they were pinning on him. "What violation?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though I wanted to laugh. Linda held up a sheet of paper, looked like it came from a broken photocopier, and declared, "Your dog barks too loudly, isn't registered with the HOA, and disturbs the peace. This is a $500 fine. If you don't pay within 24 hours, we'll confiscate it." I blinked a few times, trying to figure out if this was real or just a dumb prank. "Confiscate Duke? On what authority?" Norman nodded like a pecking chicken. Sally pointed her phone at my face, and Bruce stepped forward, hands ready like he was about to grab Duke. Linda stood there, chest puffed out like she was about to get a medal. I looked at them, from Linda's smugness to Bruce's tensed fists, and thought, well, they just picked the wrong guy to mess with. I stood there staring at Linda Grayson and her lackeys with that ridiculous fine in her hand. Duke, my hound dog, ambled out onto the porch, yawning again like he found the whole situation amusing too. Linda had just declared they'd confiscate Duke if I didn't pay $500 within 24 hours for barking too loud, and not registering with the HOA. I blinked a few times trying to stay calm, though inside I wanted to ask if they were insane. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice steady like when I question a defendant in court. Linda puffed out her chest, pushed her sunglasses up a bit, and replied with the confidence of someone reading law from a textbook. "I said your dog is violating community rules. The HOA has full authority to enforce in Pinewood Estates, and we're here to fine you for failing to control it." Sally nodded eagerly, her phone still in my face like she was filming a documentary. Norman flipped through his notebook, muttering something about neighbor complaints, while Bruce crossed his arms, eyeing Duke like he was a wanted criminal. I furrowed my brow, glanced at Duke. He was sprawled on the porch, scratching his ear with his back leg, ignoring the charges they'd pinned on him. "Full authority," I repeated, my voice rising slightly in disbelief. "Where do you get that authority, Miss Grayson? Texas state law or just your imagination?" Linda didn't flinch. She held up the paper, reading aloud like she was delivering a verdict. "You've been warned before about this dog's behavior, and since you haven't cooperated, the HOA has the right to take strong measures, including confiscating it to ensure community order." I almost burst out laughing. Warned before. Did she mean the time they sent a letter complaining that Duke dug a tiny hole near the fence, a hole I filled in 5 minutes? Or the time they told me I had to register Duke with them like he was a car, needing a permit? I took a deep breath, trying not to let this absurdity ruin my morning. Interesting, I said, stepping down from the porch to face them directly. So what are you going to do? Take Duke right now? With what? That guy's bare hands. I glanced at Bruce, who was flexing like he was about to wrestle my 90-pound dog. Linda smirked and gestured to Bruce. He pulled an old rope from his pocket. Not a leash, but something you'd use to tie cargo on a truck. Sally giggled. Norman scribbled something, and Linda announced, "We have our ways. You should pay the fine if you don't want to lose your dog." That's when I decided to end this farce. I stepped closer to the door, grabbed my wallet from the coat pocket hanging inside, and turned back. "Fine," I said, my voice calm. "But before you do something stupid, let me introduce myself." I opened my wallet, pulled out my district judge badge, and held it up for them all to see. The shiny emblem glinted in the sunlight, reading, Henry Caldwell, Oak Ridge District Judge. Linda's eyes widened, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. Sally lowered her phone. Norman stopped writing, and Bruce dropped the rope like he'd been caught stealing. "I'm not some average neighbor you can bully," I said, my voice dropping like when I deliver a ruling in court. "I'm the district judge, and right now, you're breaking the law, impersonating officials and threatening personal property. Want me to call the real cops to explain it further?" I stood on my porch, watching Linda Grayson and her crew squirm after I just exposed their ridiculous fine scheme. Duke, my hound dog, was still sprawled beside me, tail wagging lightly like he couldn't care less about the barking too loud charge they'd slapped on him. Linda stammered after seeing my badge, her sunglasses halfway down her nose, but I knew she wasn't the type to back down easily. Sure enough, Linda took a deep breath, adjusted her glasses, and regained her smugness. "Judge or not," she said, her voice shrill like she was arguing with the city council, "you still have to follow Pinewood Estates rules. Your dog is a nuisance, and since you refuse to pay the fine, we have the right to confiscate it right now." I blinked, unable to believe my ears. "Confiscate Duke? Right now?" I glanced at Duke. He just rolled over, exposing his furry belly like he was begging for a scratch, then back at Linda. "You just said confiscate right now?" I asked, my voice rising slightly at the sheer absurdity. "Yes," Linda snapped, motioning to Bruce. The musclehead picked up the old rope he'd dropped, stepping closer to my porch with a look like he was about to wrangle a wild animal. Sally giggled again, raising her phone to keep filming, while Norman flipped his notebook, muttering, "Per Section 7B, we can address disruptive animals." I stood there, arms still crossed, watching Bruce approach Duke. My dog lifted his head, sniffed the air, and let out a low growl. Not aggressive, more like, "What are you doing, idiot? You're going to take Duke with that rope?" I asked, unable to hold back a laugh. "Do you even know that's not a legal leash? And who gave you permission to step onto my property without a warrant?" Linda didn't answer right away. She crossed her arms, chest puffed out like she was about to get a medal, then declared, "The HOA has civil authority in this neighborhood. We're here to protect the community, and your dog is a threat. Bruce, do it." Bruce nodded, stepping onto the porch, rope taut in his hands like he actually thought he could drag Duke off easily. That's when I decided to shut this circus down before it went too far. "Stop right there," I said, my voice dropping like when I issue an order in court. Bruce froze, glancing at Linda for direction. I stepped off the porch, positioning myself between Duke and the musclehead, and locked eyes with Linda. "You just said confiscate and protect the community. Cute, but let me tell you something. Impersonating an official, threatening personal property, and trespassing without legal authority are 3 separate crimes under Texas law. Want me to cite the specific statutes?" Linda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Sally lowered her phone. Norman stopped scribbling, and Bruce stepped back, the rope in his hands suddenly looking like a kid's toy. I continued, my voice steady but sharp. "I'm a district judge, not a neighborhood watchman or some idle volunteer. I can have Oak Ridge police here in minutes, and they'd love to cuff you for impersonation and harassment. So unless you want to sit in a cell instead of an HOA meeting, I suggest you leave my yard in 5 seconds." Silence fell. Linda trembled, clutching the paper like it was a shield. Norman swallowed hard, sweat rolling down his forehead, while Sally whispered something to Bruce like, "I told you we shouldn't listen to her." I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. By the 4th second, Linda spun around, clearing her throat like she was trying to save face. "This isn't over, Mr. Caldwell," she shouted before storming off, dragging her stumbling crew behind her, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I stood there, watching them retreat, Duke growling softly like he agreed. After I chased Linda Grayson and her lackeys out of my yard, I thought they'd have the sense to back off. I'd expose their confiscate Duke nonsense, flashing my judge badge and throwing legal threats that sent Linda marching away with a dramatic "this isn't over" promise. But I've dealt with her type in court before. Stubborn, arrogant, and incapable of admitting defeat. I knew this HOA crew wouldn't let it go. And sure enough, Linda came back swinging. Not with anything big, but with petty, ridiculous stunts that left me both annoyed and amused. The next morning I stepped outside to take out the trash, only to find my bin gone. No trace, no clue, like it had been kidnapped in the night. I frowned, scanning Pinewood Estates, and then spotted Linda standing across the street, arms crossed with a smirk like she'd just won a chess match. I took a deep breath, telling myself it wasn't worth getting mad over this childish game, and went back inside. But it didn't end there. When I checked my mailbox, an envelope with the HOA stamp was sitting there. I opened it, and good lord, it was a list of fines I wanted to rip to shreds on the spot. The letter said I was banned from using the neighborhood trash service for non-compliance with community rules, prohibited from parking in my own garage for obstructing aesthetics, and required to attend a mandatory meeting to address inappropriate behavior. I stood there, holding the paper, looking at Duke yawning under the oak tree in my yard, and laughed. They thought this would scare me. I tore the letter in half right there, letting the pieces flutter to the ground like confetti on a holiday, then went inside for more coffee. If Linda wanted to play this game, she'd have to try harder. But of course Linda didn't stop there. That afternoon, I drove home after a long court session at the district, only to find an orange traffic cone blocking my garage entrance. Taped to it was a plastic sheet, scribbled with "garage use prohibited by HOA order. Violation of community safety clause." I frowned, got out of the car, and stared at the thing like it was an artifact from another planet. Ban my garage. In my own house? I yanked the cone out of the ground, tossed it across the street with a satisfying clack, and ripped the paper in two. Duke ran out from the backyard, barking a few cheerful yips like he was cheering me on. Right then, I glanced across the street and saw Sally Pierce standing there, phone in hand, filming like I'd just committed murder. Next to her was Norman Tate, clutching his notebook, scribbling furiously. Probably something like "Henry Caldwell vandalizes HOA property," or some nonsense. I crossed my arms, stared straight at them, and shouted across the road, "Get a good shot, Sally, so I've got evidence when I sue you for harassment." Sally flinched, lowering her phone, while Norman stepped back like he thought I'd charge over and grab them. Less than 2 minutes later, Linda showed up, storming over like a mini hurricane, waving the torn plastic sheet like it was crime scene evidence. "You can't do that," she yelled, her face red with rage. "This is an official HOA order. You can't ignore community rules." I smirked, trying not to laugh in her face. "Linda," I said, my voice calm, like when I explained the law to a stubborn defendant, "you don't have the authority to ban my garage or anything in my house. You just have the power to annoy me, and you're doing a great job at that." Linda's eyes widened, clearly not expecting me to push back. "You'll pay for this," she snarled before turning on her heel, dragging Sally and Norman with her like a defeated army. I stood there watching them retreat, Duke barking a few more times like a farewell. After those petty stunts like hiding my trash can and blocking my garage, I thought Linda and her HOA crew would get bored and leave me alone. I'd torn up their ridiculous orders, tossed the traffic cone across the street, and watched them scurry off like rats after I threatened to sue. But I was wrong. Linda wasn't the type to quit. I'd seen enough of her kind in court, lose one round and they come back swinging dirty. This time she decided to escalate from childish games to calling the real cops to deal with me and Duke, my hound dog. That day I was in my office at the district courthouse, reviewing a dull land dispute case, when my phone rang. It was James "Jim" Larson, a friend and local lawyer who lived a few blocks from me in Pinewood Estates. His voice was urgent. "Henry, you need to get home now. 2 cop cars are parked in front of your house. They say they got a report about some guy threatening people with an aggressive dog." I frowned, setting the file down. "Threatening? With Duke?" I asked, half amused, half annoyed. Jim sighed. "I'd bet $100 Linda's behind this. Hurry back. I'm watching from outside." I left the courthouse, driving home as fast as I could without running a red light, though as a judge, I could have claimed an emergency if needed. When I pulled into Pinewood Estates, I saw 2 police cars parked right at my driveway, their red and blue lights flashing like a cheap action movie. Duke was barking from the backyard, not aggressively, but more like "someone's bothering me here." I parked, stepped out and spotted 2 familiar officers, Tom Hayes and Laura Bennett, talking to Linda. She stood a few steps away, arms crossed, playing the perfect victim with a worried look like she'd just witnessed the crime of the century. I walked over, hands in my pockets, voice calm. Hey Tom, Laura, what's going on that brings you two here? Tom turned, recognized me instantly, and gave an awkward smile. Oh hey boss. I mean Judge Caldwell. We got a report about suspicious activity here. Some guy with an aggressive dog, threatening neighbors or something. Laura nodded, but I caught her eyes darting away, like she knew this was a farce from the start. I glanced at Linda, now clutching her chest like a silent film actress. I'm guessing that report came from Miss Grayson here, right? I asked, loud enough for her to hear. Linda cleared her throat, stepping forward with a sanctimonious air. I'm just doing my duty as a responsible citizen. Some people heard loud barking, saw you yelling in your yard, and got worried about community safety. I had to call the police. I laughed, unable to hold it in. Yelling. I'd only shouted once, when I told Sally to film carefully, so I'd have evidence to sue them. The barking. Duke let out a few yips when I tossed the traffic cone. I turned to Tom. She says I threatened someone with Duke. Do you two see anything aggressive about him? Laura peeked over the fence, where Duke was wagging his tail happily, tongue lolling out like a greeting. He doesn't look like much of a threat, she said, trying to keep a straight face. Tom nodded. We're just here to check it out. But if there's nothing real, then, I cut in. There's nothing real. This is a fake report. And I'd bet Linda called to get back at me for not paying her ridiculous $500 fine. Linda flushed, stammering. I'm not getting back at anyone. I'm just concerned for the neighborhood. I crossed my arms staring her down, concerned by slandering me. Do you know what the law says about filing a false police report, Linda? I could have Tom and Laura log this, then haul you to court for harassment and wasting public resources. Want to try it? Linda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Tom sighed, turning to her. Miss Grayson, faking a report is big trouble. If there's no evidence, we'll mark this as a misunderstanding and go. Laura nodded, clearly done with the drama. Linda stood there, face red, hands trembling like she wanted to argue but knew she'd lost. This isn't over, she muttered before turning away, nearly tripping in her fury. Tom and Laura apologized to me, then drove off. I stood there, watching Duke romp around the yard, and thought, she just played big. But I haven't even thrown my real punch yet. I'd humiliated her in front of Tom and Laura, the two cops, by exposing her fake report about a threatening man with an aggressive dog in Pinewood Estates. But I was dead wrong. Linda wasn't the type to stop when beaten. I dealt with enough stubborn defendants in court to know she'd come back, and this time she didn't just play dirty, she went big. Instead of petty tricks like hiding trash cans or blocking garages, Linda decided to hire workers to tear up my yard. That morning I was jolted awake by the roar of engines right outside my house. I stumbled out of bed, still in pajamas, hair a mess like I'd been through a windstorm, and yanked the curtains open. A big truck was parked at the entrance to Pinewood Estates, with a crew in reflective vests unloading excavators, shovels, and a pile of orange traffic cones onto the street. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I might still be half asleep, but then heard Duke barking like crazy from the backyard. Not his happy bark, but an intruder's alert bark. I frowned, glanced across the street, and sure enough, there was Linda, arms crossed, smirking like she'd just hit the jackpot. I slipped on flip-flops, bolted outside, still clutching a cold coffee mug from last night. Duke ran up beside me, tail wagging like a windshield wiper, but his eyes were locked on the workers invading my front yard. A guy who looked like the crew leader, holding a clipboard, approached when he saw me. Morning, sir, he said, voice flat like he was reading a script. We're here to fix an underground pipe. Got a leak report from this property. I blinked, staring at my yard. Lush green grass, not a puddle or sign of a leak anywhere. A leak? I asked, voice rising in disbelief. Who reported it? He flipped a page, glanced at it and said, Linda Grayson, Pinewood Estates HOA president. She said it's a serious issue, and we're ordered to dig up the yard to check. I turned to Linda, who was now pretending to admire the trees across the street like she had nothing to do with it. Interesting, I said loud enough for her to hear, because I'm here every day and haven't seen a drop of water leaking anywhere. The crew leader shrugged. We're just following orders, buddy. She signed the contract. I set the coffee mug on the porch step, stepping closer. There's no leak, I said, voice calm but firm, and no one's digging up my yard without my permission, or a court order. Whoever Grayson signed a contract with can deal with her, but if you touch one blade of grass here, I'll sue your whole crew for trespassing. The crew leader hesitated, glancing at his team like he wanted backup. I saw Linda getting antsy, marching toward us like a mini tornado. You can't stop them, she yelled, pointing in my face. The HOA has the right to maintain neighborhood infrastructure, and your yard's a danger to the community. I smirked, trying not to laugh. A danger? This yard that Duke can't even dig a hole deeper than 8 inches in. Linda flushed. You have no right to obstruct our work. This is for the greater good. I crossed my arms, staring her down. Linda, you have no authority here. Hiring people to tear up my yard without proof of a leak is property damage. Want me to call the cops again? Or this time, do you want to face me in court directly? The crew leader swallowed hard, turning to his team. Pack it up, guys. I'm not getting tangled in a legal mess. The workers started grabbing cones and shovels, clearly not eager to face a judge on a random morning. Linda lunged forward, shouting, "You can't leave. I paid you." I shrugged. Then dig it yourself. Linda, but if you set 1 foot in my yard, I'll have you locked up for trespassing and fraud. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, just stood there, hands shaking like a stranded fish. The crew finished packing and drove off, leaving Linda red-faced and her smirk gone. Duke barked a few times like a goodbye, and I picked up my cold coffee, taking a sip. Linda stormed off, muttering something about this isn't over. Little did I know she'd escalate to trying to evict me from the neighborhood, like I was some uninvited tenant she could kick out any time. I got a thick envelope in my mailbox, stamped with the Pinewood Estates HOA seal. I opened it, and inside was a 3-page letter, written in flowery language like a fake legal document. It stated my home was under disciplinary review for community-harming behavior, and the HOA was taking steps to revoke my residency rights. They listed a laundry list of violations: Duke barking too loud, refusing to pay fines, and hostile actions, like tossing the traffic cone and threatening Linda. I sat at the kitchen table, sipped my coffee, and laughed so hard. Duke lifted his head from the floor, staring at me like I'd lost it. Evict me? From my own house? I own this place, pay my taxes, and there's no law in Texas letting a self-appointed HOA boot someone from their private property. But Linda clearly thought she had that power. The letter ended with an invitation, or rather a summons, to a community meeting Friday night to address the issue. I smirked, folded it up, and thought, fine Linda, if you want to play courtroom, I'll show you how a real judge handles it. Friday night, I showed up at the Pinewood Estates Community Center, where Linda had turned it into a stage for her drama. The room was packed with neighbors, sitting on folding chairs like a courtroom, eyes curious and confused. Linda stood up front, by a table stacked with papers, wearing a blazer like she was a defense attorney. Norman Tate sat beside her, clutching his notebook, while Sally Pierce held her phone, ready to film. Bruce Malone loomed behind like a bodyguard, arms crossed with an overly serious look. I walked in, hands in pockets, and took a seat in the back, waiting to see what Linda had up her sleeve. She cleared her throat, starting in a tone like a kindergarten teacher explaining rules. We're here to discuss the deeply concerning behavior of Mr. Henry Caldwell, who's refused to cooperate with the community. I rolled my eyes, cutting and skipped the theatrics. Linda, you want to kick me out of the neighborhood, right? Linda flushed, but tried to stay composed. Well, yes, with the violations you've racked up, damaging HOA property, threatening members, letting your dog disrupt things, we feel you're no longer a fit here. I stood up, walked to the middle of the room, silencing the crowd. What violations? I asked, voice carrying clear across. Damaging HOA property. You mean the traffic cone I tossed because it blocked my garage? Threatening. You mean when I said you'd face court for harassment? Duke disrupting. Got any proof beyond your made-up stories? Linda stammered, flipping through papers like she was grasping for a lifeline. But I didn't stop. You want to evict me? Fine. But where's your legal authority to do that? Does the HOA own my house? Can it cancel my mortgage? The meeting room fell dead silent. A few neighbors started whispering, like they just realized how absurd this plan was. Linda forced a smile. You're missing my point. This is a community issue. And you, I raised a hand to cut her off. No, Linda. You're the one missing the point. Pinewood Estates isn't a gated community, and the HOA has no power to evict anyone. This meeting is meaningless, and if you keep this up, I'll sue you for slander and abuse of authority. Linda stood there, clutching her papers like she wanted to rip them apart. You don't deserve to live here, she shouted. But no one backed her up. I shrugged. I think I'll stay, Linda. My house, my rules. She spun around, dragging her lackeys out with her. I'd exposed her plan to evict me from the neighborhood as a farce, with no legal basis, leaving the whole room stunned at her ridiculousness. But Linda wasn't the type to stop when she lost. After the failed yard crew stunt, the cops and the meeting all flopped. I knew she'd try something new, and this time, she aimed for the county inspectors to take me and Duke, my hound dog, down. A few days later, I was in the living room, reviewing files for an upcoming case, when the doorbell rang. Duke lifted his head from the rug, barking a few times like an alarm. I got up, opened the door and saw 2 county inspectors in uniform, standing there, holding clipboards and a camera. A middle-aged guy with salt and pepper hair introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Inspector Phillips. This is my colleague Davis. We got a complaint about multiple building violations at this house. Need to check it out now." I frowned, glancing over their shoulders, and saw Linda at the street corner, arms crossed with a smirk, like she'd set the perfect trap. "Building violations?" I asked, voice half surprised, half amused. "Who filed the complaint?" Phillips flipped through his papers, replying Pinewood Estates HOA, represented by Miss Linda Grayson. "They say there's unpermitted construction, substandard plumbing, and a health hazard from an animal." I laughed, looking at Duke. He was wagging his tail by the door, tongue out like he was greeting them. "Health hazard? From a dog who got a vet checkup last month." Phillips shrugged. "We're just following procedure. Can we come in to inspect?" I crossed my arms, thinking fast. Linda was clearly going all in, hoping the inspectors would find something to corner me. But I'm a county judge. I know my house is cleaner than the law requires. "Sure," I said, swinging the door wide. "Go ahead and look. I've got nothing to hide." Phillips and Davis stepped in, measuring walls, checking pipes, opening cabinets, even peering at the floors. Duke followed, sniffing their legs curiously, while I sat back in my chair, sipping coffee like I was watching a movie. Nearly 2 hours passed. They took photos, scribbled notes, and whispered to each other. Linda was probably out there, dreaming of me getting slapped with a residency ban. Finally, Phillips came back, scratching his head. "Mr. Caldwell, we're done. No violations like the complaint said. Your house meets every county code." I smirked, holding back a bigger laugh. "So the complaint was completely made up?" I asked, loud enough for Linda to hear from afar. Davis nodded. "Yeah, looks that way. No illegal construction, no leaks, and the dog seems normal." I stood up, stepped onto the porch, and looked straight at Linda, who was now marching over with a tense face. "Hear that, Linda?" I called out. "My house is spotless. Duke's innocent. You just wasted the county inspector's time with this revenge stunt." Linda flushed, yelling, "This was a safety check. You can't deny the HOA's rights." I burst out laughing. "What rights?" "The right to make up stories to harass me. I'm filing a lawsuit against the HOA for slander and misuse of public resources." "Want me to call the county office right now?" Phillips and Davis exchanged a glance, clearly done with this drama. "We're finished here," Phillips said, nodding to me. "If you need an official report, just let us know." They headed back to their truck, leaving Linda standing there, hands trembling like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. "You're outrageous," she snapped, but I cut her off. "No, Linda, you are. My house is perfect, and your game isn't. Keep this up and I'll make you pay with real law." Linda glared at me, eyes blazing, then stormed off, nearly tripping in her rage. I stood on the porch, Duke barking a few times like he was cheering, and she thought inspectors would take me down. I'll turn the tables, and this time, Linda's got nowhere to run. I grabbed my phone, dialed Jim Larson. "Jim, get the paperwork ready. I'm suing the HOA for harassment, officially." I made Linda crash and burn when the county inspectors confirmed my house had no violations, turning her safety check plan into a joke. I'd threatened to sue the HOA for harassment and misuse of public resources. And this time, I wasn't bluffing. Linda might think she still had a shot at revenge, but I knew that HOA was out of moves. When I decide to strike back, I don't stop until justice is served, for me, for Duke, and for the whole neighborhood she'd tormented for so long. Right after Inspectors Phillips and Davis left, I called Jim Larson, my friend and local lawyer. "Jim," I said, voice firm, "prep the lawsuit. I want the HOA investigated top to bottom, finances, contracts, everything. Linda's gone too far." Jim chuckled over the phone. "I've been waiting for this day. She won't know what hit her." I hung up, sat on the porch, watched Duke wag his tail beside me, and thought, she wanted to play with fire. I'll let her burn. A few days later, my lawsuit hit the county court, demanding a full probe into Pinewood Estates HOA for harassment, slander, and suspected financial mismanagement. I knew Linda hadn't just targeted me. She'd find neighbors for nonsense like overgrown grass or unregistered cats. My suit was the tipping point. The county opened an investigation, and what they found blew past my expectations. Turns out Linda had embezzled over $50,000 from the HOA fund, using it for community events that never happened. really just parties for her and her cronies, like Norman Tate, Sally Pierce, and Bruce Malone. It unraveled fast. One morning, I was sipping coffee when I saw police cars pull up to Linda's house, a few doors down. I stepped onto the porch, Duke trailing me, and watched Tom Hayes and Laura Bennett, the familiar officers, knock on her door. Linda opened it, pale as a ghost, clutching a suitcase like she was about to bolt. Tom held up an arrest warrant, voice steady. "Linda Grayson, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. Come with us." She screamed, "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president." But Laura just shrugged, cuffed her, and I stood there, sipping coffee, thinking, well, she's finally cuffed, and not with plastic ties. Around the same time, Norman, Sally, and Bruce got hauled in for questioning. Under pressure, they spilled everything. Norman admitted Linda forced them to fake complaints. Sally handed over a stash of videos including me tossing the traffic cone to save herself. And Bruce confessed Linda used fund money to hire the crew to wreck my yard. The three turned on her faster than you can flip a switch, leaving Linda alone to face the law. I wasn't surprised. Lackeys like that always jump ship when it sinks. Neighbors started speaking up. An emergency meeting was held at the Pinewood Estates Community Center. No Linda this time. I showed up, sat in the back, and watched furious residents recount how she'd fined them absurdly. An old lady for keeping a cat, a young guy for painting his door the wrong color. A county auditor was brought in, revealing the numbers, $50,000 gone plus fake contracts with the construction crew, the ones who tried my yard. The room erupted, and someone yelled, "Take her to court." I smirked, thinking, I've got that covered. In the end, the HOA board voted to oust Linda immediately. She tried calling from jail, threatening to sue back, but no one listened. Tom and Laura led her to the car, and as real handcuffs clicked around her wrists, I heard someone in the crowd shout, "Congrats, Linda." I stood there, watching the scene, Duke barking a few times in agreement. Linda, the self-crowned queen of Pinewood Estates, was now just a criminal being hauled off, leaving the HOA in shambles in the hands of those who once feared her. I went back home, took a final sip of coffee, and thought, she wanted to take me down, but I took down her whole empire. I finally saw Pinewood Estates peaceful again, after Linda Grayson and her tyrannical HOA crumbled. My lawsuit exposed her embezzling $50,000, leading to Linda getting cuffed and carted off in front of the whole neighborhood. Norman, Sally, and Bruce ditched her, and the residents ousted Linda, dismantling that troublemaking outfit. I stood on my porch, looking at Duke, my hound dog, wagging his tail happily, and thought, well, justice isn't just for the courtroom. Sometimes it hits your front yard. After the arrest, the HOA got a total overhaul. A new board, led by decent folks like the old cat lady, scrapped dumb rules like grass can't be over 2 inches, or dogs must be registered. Bogus fines were cancelled, and Pinewood Estates became livable for the first time since I moved in. Neighbors started chatting with me instead of avoiding me, even bringing Duke dog biscuits as thanks. I smirked, scratching his head. "You're the neighborhood hero now, old pal." And Linda, she got convicted of embezzlement, had to sell her house, and left Oak Ridge quietly. No more "this isn't over" screeches. But a few weeks later, I got a letter from jail, her scrawled handwriting apologizing for the misunderstanding. I laughed hard, grabbed a card, stuck a photo of Duke wagging his tail on it, and wrote, "Woof, justice served." I mailed it, picturing her face when she read it, and thought, you wanted to fine Duke, now he's fining you, buddy. Now every afternoon, Duke and I stroll around Pinewood Estates at sunset, no one pointing phones or hiding trash cans anymore. I look at the calm neighborhood, and feel satisfied. Linda might be plotting her next empire somewhere else, but here, she's just a faded memory. I tapped Duke's head. "See that? Sometimes all it takes is a judge and a dog to clean up a mess." Duke barked once, like he agreed. The story fake HOA officers came to ticket my dog, but I'm the real county judge. I rewrote reflects a very real slice of life in the US today. The overreach of small organizations like HOAs, homeowners associations, and how people tackle that injustice. In America, HOAs often exist in neighborhoods to keep order, but it's not rare for them to become tools for folks like Linda Grayson, who crown themselves with power to control others, from fining Duke for barking to trying to evict Henry Caldwell from Pinewood Estates. Details like Linda hiring workers to rip up a yard, calling county inspectors with fake claims, or embezzling $50,000 from HOA funds are grounded in real cases where some HOAs cross legal and ethical lines, ticking off residents. The takeaway from this tale isn't just about standing up to unfairness, it's about using knowledge and authority smartly, like Henry did. Henry, as a county judge, didn't lose his cool or act rashly when Linda harassed him, from the missing trash can to the eviction meeting. Instead, he patiently gathered evidence, threw legal threats at the right moments like with cops Tom and Laura, and finally sued the HOA to topple Linda. That mirrors an American value, trusting the legal system, and wielding it to protect yourself. In real US life today, when facing Linda's be it overbearing bosses, nosy neighbors or pushy groups, you should stay calm, know your rights like Henry with Texas law, and act strategically. Don't let emotions drive you, turn knowledge into power, like Henry sealing his win with that woof justice served card. Life's full of drama, but how you handle it, like Henry defending Duke, decides if you keep the peace. If you enjoyed watching me and Duke teach Linda a justice lesson, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next funny story. Thanks for tuning in, and see you in the next video, where justice always wins, sometimes with a bark.